It's not calling you Josh Frydenberg, it's calling you Dosh Frydenberg.
Under the Coalition, taxes for hard-working Australians will always be lower.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in a control room.
They're answers that only can come from Victoria, I'm afraid, because that's not my job.
But I ain't spending any time, though, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person was torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Well, g'day listeners, and welcome once again to the Two Jacks. It's episode 105, where we have a look at politics and media in Australia, and then have a good look around the world to see what's going on there. And joining me, as usual, is Hong Kong Jack. G'day, mate. How are you?
Pretty good.
We have some very bad weather in Brisbane and in the Northern Rivers part of New South Wales at this stage. Heavy rainfalls, incredible rainfalls, and a lot of flooding, a lot of coastal erosion from tidal swells as well. The news this morning was that Wayne Swan, Labor Party president, claimed that Cyclone Alfred may no longer be an immediate threat, Jack. Now, do you get your weather information from Wayne Swan?
No, we get ours from the Hong Kong Observatory, and we have a T1 to T10 marking system. And in 15 years, I think I've had 2 T10s, and only one of those was really serious. When the whole building's groaning, you don't exactly pull on the brown corduroys, but you start trying to remember which drawer you put them in. You know?
Yes, indeed. Now, look, the issue is with this particular tropical storm now is that it's very slow moving, dumping enormous amounts of rain. Yes, there has been wind damage, and as I said, some tidal surges as well. But just dumping an enormous amount of rain, with the biggest part of it to hit Brisbane and its surrounds, all the way between really the Sunshine Coast and Grafton, dumping enormous amounts of rain, and that will continue for the next couple of days. Very slow-moving storm. It was. I watched it on the BOM radar on Tuesday night, and it was, well, I would only be estimating, but let's say 100 to 150 kilometres off the coast of Brisbane. And it really hasn't moved very far, other than to sort of a cover over that sort of great Queensland, northern New South Wales area over the last couple of days. So, yes, I wouldn't be listening to Wayne Swan's advice too much. And indeed, the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, who's on hand in Brisbane, said that no one should be complacent about this. It's going to dump a hell of a lot of water, up to a metre a day in parts of Queensland and the Northern Rivers. And, you know, that's going to cause some flooding. So
we also have a rain warning system here, so that with the typhoon warnings, offices and schools close when you get to a certain level, and we have the same thing with rainstorms here. So a black rain means the whole city closes down, but that's 25 mils an hour. It's an inch an hour. And I think it's an excellent idea because, as the rainstorms are not dangerous in the same way that the typhoons or cyclones are, but they do disrupt the city. And having a set system whereby if you're getting this degree of downpour, you go home, makes sense.
Yeah, I think that most people have observed, the requests from emergency services departments and the Queensland state government, the federal government as well, have listened to them. There are, of course, a small minority who are hanging outside the beaches and taking their phones with them to film the carnage. Look, we just wish everybody well there. The Northern Rivers, is, of course, is a major flood zone, so we know it's going to be very tricky there for a little while. And then what happens after that is that storm will move very slowly into parts of Western Queensland and Western New South Wales. That might be a very, very good thing for farmers, but if it is slow moving, it'll dump too much rain. on those farmers who do need some water there too. So it's just the way things go in Australia. Unfortunately, when it rains, it pours often. So we have in mind too our farmers, and we hope that they get enough rain, but not too much. So we are still on full alert there. Football games have been cancelled. We hope that there is a Gabba. There is a Gabba to have to play on after, let's say, Saturday night. It is very, very serious situation, of course. Cyclone Alfred, so we just wish all our Queensland listeners, all our people from northern New South Wales as well. We hope that you are not too inconvenienced by all of this, and we hope you stay safe.
Yeah, stay dry. I tell you, we were suffering last night as well, though. With no football, we were reduced to WhatsApping each other about Ukraine and Russia for about an hour.
It was, you're battling for entertainment when that goes on.
I even watched Q&A.
Yeah, well, that is an act, as I told you at the time, that is an act of self-harm.
Well, it was a choice between that or watching two chicken thighs cook in the oven. In the end, the two chicken thighs were made more compelling television.
Yeah. Look, good luck to everyone there. Now, in the federal political sphere, the coalition announced, or it vowed, to stop federal public servants working from home. And I'm going to, we'll talk about who this policy is designed to appease in a moment, but it was rolled out with a unnecessary amount of fuss. You get the feeling that they're making, that these policies are made on the run. It tends to appease those people who probably aren't working in a public service but who have to go to their workplaces every day. They go, why can't I work from home? Or how come these people are to work from home? Jane Hume is the Shadow Minister for Finance and the Public Service. And she came out with a story saying that all the reputable studies showed that working from home reduced productivity, which is not true. And there are a number of studies that indicate that working from home increases productivity. When Ewan Hannon, the industrial relations editor at The Australian, approached Jane Hume about this, she acknowledged that she had misspoken, Jack, the dreaded misspeaking. It's lazy stuff, mate. It really is lazy. You've got to get across this stuff. And I saw her again on Sky News last night being interviewed there, where she said, we're hearing stories of people caravanning, public servants were caravanning around the world, around Australia, I should say, while they should be working, Jack, either from home or at the office. And I thought, stories? You've heard stories? Is that a basis for policy? Just a few random anecdotes? Your thoughts, Jack?
The working from home thing's complicated. It's not very common here in Hong Kong just because the apartments are so small. You can't just kind of hive off one section of the house to use as a home office very easily, I know people who, two lawyers, two kids, and a foreign domestic helper living in 800 square feet. So, you can't do that. Four people working around the same dining room table is not a good idea. And I also worry about the young people starting out. I think it's hard. They miss out
on the mentoring and all that sort of stuff.
They do. I can tell you, Jack, that I left law school knowing a fair bit about law, but absolutely zero about being a lawyer. And it was only by being able to follow around the great lawyers I work with that I actually learned how to do it properly. And I think young people miss out on that sort of thing.
I'm not sure. I mean, look. what the studies show, I mean, I looked at all of this stuff when Chris Minns, the New South Wales Premier, issued an edict to New South Wales public servants to return from their work from home arrangements. Now, Chris Minns is a very clever politician, and he said we must have them back, but he had no time frame. And indeed, it was left to the department heads to initiate whatever policies they had in mind. So it was a sort of an instruction, really, without a lot of weight behind it. It was good politics, and I think
more of a guideline than an instruction. But there is one point, a very sensible thing.
I just wanted to go through the studies. Just give me a minute. So and I looked at all of this at the time. So there are a whole raft of studies. What the studies predominantly show is that the more complicated or complex the task that's being performed, the work from home, the more productive the work from home becomes. When people are working from home with relatively mundane tasks, their productivity tends to decline. That's what the majority of these studies indicate, that there are benefits and that there are shortcomings as well. But along those lines, the more complex the task the person performs, the more productive they will be working from home, Jack.
Yeah, and that's been common sense for a long time. People will go away somewhere quiet to do complex tasks, even within the office. You know, they'll pick up their papers and go down to the library or disappear down to somewhere else to do them. That's just been the way it's worked for a long time. One of the problems is it's disrupting settled expectations of workers who've sort of had arrangements around this now for some years, and you've got to take your time fixing those problems. I don't think directions.
This is right. So not just the public service, but the public service in this instance, many of them anyway, have negotiated as part of their business agreements with the Commonwealth, their employer, to have work from home facilities. I know people in the state and federal public service who, I mean, they work a 38-hour week, and the agreements, the enterprise bargaining agreements that they live under, determines that they can work from home. So this would all have to be dealt with in the Parliament to override those things. So I'm not sure that's so. Look, this is really an idea, a thought bubble that's come from the opposition that might resonate with certain parts of the community that they really just didn't think through, because they really did fluff the release. Jane Hume misspeaking. She's a very lazy politician. Does a lot of the front work for the opposition these days. You've got to be better prepared than that.
I've got to say, I think the politics of it are quite good for Dutton, because I think the idea of public servants having more freedom to work from home is unpopular around the wider the community.
It might be unpopular with certain sectors. What it does, Jack, is signal, and this is what the government picked up on. Katie Gallagher, the Minister for Women, Minister for Finance herself, told ABC Radio National that working from home arrangements were in place in businesses across the country and allowed women in particular to manage some of the other responsibilities they have outside of the workplace. And so that's where the attacks come from Labor, that Peter Dutton and the coalition don't understand what modern families are going through in the workplace and their social and family lives. And I think that's a reasonable point to make. I mean, if you can't convince people, and this is what I say, the rollout of the policy was a shambles because they were unable to convince anybody that this was going to add to productivity in some way. And Jane Hume saying every study says it working from home reduces productivity was quickly found out. I mean, you can't go to the media and make these announcements with those sorts of stupid sweeping statements that can be knocked over in a heartbeat. Really, really dumb. I'm looking at their sort of policy rollouts all the time and thinking, gee whiz, I don't know. A lot of this stuff is just thought bubble. I mean, you would have seen Peter Dutton talk about the possibility of what do we call? What's the right term? Basically, that he believes that there are too many large insurers in Australia, and that they may, and certainly the coalition will have to have a look at. Is it demutualising, Jack? Is that the right term?
Yes,
it's probably not. It's but basically stripping back those companies by legislation, and within 2 weeks. The Shadow Treasurer, Angus Taylor, knocked that on the head. It was just a real thought bubble sort of stuff. And I think, I know Labor's polling's pretty awful at the moment, the high 20s primary vote. Coalition not much better in the high 30s. But I just think the longer we go into this campaign, fake or otherwise, the more they're going to get found out.
When does it become a real campaign?
Well, that's something we don't know. And that was another reason that Dutton sort of fluffed this week, I reckon, as well. On the Tuesday, we got a very slow-moving cyclone in Alfred. But on Tuesday, he departed Brisbane and went to a fundraiser at Justin Hemmy's place. Now, the optics of that look pretty awful. And there was Ali France, his Labor opponent, in his seat, filling up sandbags and what have you. Not a good look. And then they sort of created a bit of a furore about Anthony Albanese announcing the election date during the sort of crisis of this storm. Something which he hasn't done, and they straight batted pretty well away. So, we're acting on behalf of the country. We're acting in the best interests of those people who are going to be affected, etc., etc., etc. And we're not thinking about electoral politics at this stage.
It's got to be. He's got to go to the Governor General before Monday night to get the next available date, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, everyone I talk to at the Oz says April, but we're running out of time for April, mate, and so I'm looking at a date in May 3, May 10, and that would be, and it makes sense to me anyway to go around that date, which would allow Chalmers another budget. Now, they would lose some benefits because the budget will be in deficit. They had a budget in surplus last financial year, but other than that sort of symbolic stuff, it gives them an opportunity, let's face it, throw a bit of money around, Jack. So what are your thoughts? May, April, what are you thinking?
I rather suspected that he was going to go in April, but yes.
Yeah, May does give that opportunity for a bit of a cash splash budget, Jack. Beer cigs up. No, down. Beer cigs down.
I don't think they'll want to go that late myself.
No, well, there are no signs that Chalmers is preparing a budget.
No.
So yeah, I mean, tactically it makes sense to me. And Albanese has always said he'd prefer to go full term. Well, May 10 is full term. I think that's pretty much exactly 3 years. So we'll see. Yep. Maybe I'm completely wrong about this because every time I mention May, everyone goes, no, it'll be April. So we will see. But I don't think there will be any announcement until Cyclone Alfred makes or starts to dissipate and the mop-up operations occur in northern New South Wales and southern Queensland. So that's going to be another week. That's going to be another week minimum. The national accounts, Jack, they're not a bad set of numbers. We've got employment at 4 and a bit, inflation at 2 and a bit, and growth. Well, growth is tepid. Growth is annual rate about 1.3%. Judith Sloan had this to mention really around productivity, that this is the area where the economy is tanking quite a lot in terms of worker productivity.
I've been banging on about this boringly for a year, but not just in Australia, but in the United Kingdom and the United States as well, and indeed for most of Europe, the way out of the kind of stagnation that the economies are suffering from now is the only way out, really, is to improve productivity. And we learnt that 30 or 40 years ago. It's what Bob Hawke and Paul Keating did at the start of the Hawke government, was to pull out all stops to improve productivity. And no one much around the Western world's doing that, and that's a mistake, in my view.
Well, I did see a senior executive from the Business Council during the week, Jack, saying the biggest problem for productivity in Australia is housing. And it makes a lot of sense, right?
Mm. Tell me.
It makes a hell of a lot of sense. We've been saying this for a long time, haven't we? That housing is the crux of all of our problems, and they are not basically easy. It's not an easy. Well, this executive said, "Just build, baby, build." He said, "Just build," but just dealing with the supply side of housing is not going to solve the big problems, or at least you're going to have. If you do deal with the supply side, you're going to have some people who have already entered into the market, just, single homeowners with a mortgage, who are going to be disadvantaged by increasing the supply side of housing. But it does make a lot of sense that if people, of a certain age, and we're talking people who are getting into their 40s now, believe that they can never afford to own their own home, that affects every element of their lives, including their working lives. Got to fix that. Just, it's not that easy to do. But yes, housing crises, they're not just a large group of people who can't afford to get into the market. It's a much wider social problem than that, and an economic one.
Yeah, I don't think productivity will be an election issue, because I don't think people talk about it, and the newspapers don't cover it, and the TV doesn't cover it. But it is the only path out of the problems we've got at the moment.
Well, the issue is that we're going backwards, and that's essentially what Judith Sloan was talking about. GDP per hour per hour worked, I should say, fell by 0.1% in the most recent quarter, after declines of 0.7 and 0.5 in the previous two. So there's an issue. It's not as if productivity is kind of stabilised; it's going backwards, and it needs to be addressed. But I think that there are some really big issues around how we address that. It's not going to be an issue, Jack, in the federal election. You're quite right, but it is odd. I mean, work is such an important part of our lives that we don't have more open discussions about industrial relations and about what work means to us. It's one of those things. You said media don't report and all that sort of stuff. There's really no forum for people to sit around and talk about how their work lives affect their lives overall.
Yeah, if you remember back to the Hawke Keating time, they really changed the conversation about how the economy worked. They sat down with union leaders and business leaders and said, we need to be more productive. How are we going to go about it? And it became, they had the economic summit. It became part of the national conversation. How are we going to make the country work better, work more efficiently? And people were, with the force of personality of Hawke and Keating, people were open to new ways of thinking to make that happen. And it worked.
And the simple business of discussing the nature of work and how it affects our lives, these should not be taboos.
Yeah, can I give you an example from the UK? That the UK government gave train drivers a 25% pay rise and GPs a 20% pay rise, right? And in both those cases, there are service delivery problems, and the pay rises were given without a discussion about how we can improve the service delivery. And anybody who's got a job knows that there are ways of improving what you do and making it more efficient. We all know that because we work in them, and that's exactly the wrong approach the UK government took. Is if you're going to give people a real sweetener, you've got to sit down with them saying, okay, we'll give you this, but how do we go about making the service delivery more what people want?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, this is the problem that Chris Minns is now dealing with, and why we've had protracted industrial relations around Sydney Rail, is that he can't basically give the train drivers the 20-odd% that they want, because sooner or later the next group of state employees are going to say, well, we want 20 as well, outside of the productivity issue. Yeah, and they just can't afford to do that. So this is why we have these sort of issues around industrial disputation.
And for the train drivers, can I say, this is how you get driverless trains in Sydney.
Yeah, of course, we have the Metro, which is driverless. I think there are...
Oh, no, it still has train drivers standing there doing nothing.
The Metro is automatically driven, but there are people there. You're right.
Yeah. People who spend the whole day going around on the train system looking at their phones.
Yeah, and occasionally looking at the gauges too, one would imagine. All right, we must get on with Ukraine and the United States, Jack. We spoke last week. It was, I think, the day before Vance and Trump attacked Zelensky in the Oval Office. When we were recording, Sir Keir Starmer had been feted by Trump in the White House, and when Trump was asked if he regretted calling Zelensky a dictator, he said, "Did I say that? I shouldn't have said that." But it got much worse the following day, and Zelensky ordered out of the White House. Apparently, his dress code wasn't acceptable either. Very strange. Very strange, all of this. And now we've got a situation where it's very clear that militarily, at least, America will not back Ukraine.
No. Just can I just make one comment about the White House kerfuffle? People who get visibly angry hardly ever win arguments. So that was a big error from Trump. They often think they've won the argument, but they're mostly wrong. And the second thing is...
This stuff's supposed to happen behind closed doors.
Yes, it has. I mean, Zelensky and Biden had a similar to-do about a lack of gratitude back in 2022, but it happened in a private meeting. Which is a different thing. But I would say this, that there are one, maybe two foreign leaders. There are two foreign leaders who walk into the Oval Office as an equal. Xi Jinping, because China's an equal power to the United States, or a near equal, and Putin, because they've got all the nukes. Everybody else walks into the Oval Office as a supplicant, as a non-equal. I just make that comment.
Yeah. But that's not to say that they need to be ritually humiliated in front of the media.
I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying they have to manage it from that. They have to know what they want out of the meeting and go in and get it, which Keir Starmer did an excellent job of, I might add. But the problem with the Ukraine situation, as I see it, is that there is an excellent moral case for the destruction of the Putin government. But I don't believe that there is United States support to do that, or even to push the borders back to 2021, and certainly not to 2013. I don't think that support's going to exist in the US.
I'll ask you some questions about that in a minute. What's happened in the last week is that America, or the United States, the Trump administration, has cut all military aid to Ukraine.
Paused it, I think is the correct term.
Well, paused. Let's say it is severed intelligence cooperation. So this. I gave you the example last night, and I'll give our listeners the same one. An American soldier might be sitting in a place like Pine Gap and will notice the Russians launch a ballistic missile, and they will track that missile all the way to, let's say, Kyiv, where it slams into a hospital, and they will not be obliged, the American in Pine Gap and the senior people up the line will not be obliged to advise the Ukrainian government that there is an incoming missile. I mean, we've been seeing this throughout the war, that there have been a number of missiles launched at Kyiv and Lodz, and they have been picked off. Now, that comes from advice from US military satellites. So that's now gone. That's all gone. There's $100 million billion US dollars in military aid per year over the last 3 that's now been taken off. We've had, prior to last week, we've had the Ukrainians being told the preconditions of a ceasefire negotiation. They've been actually stripped of everything. Now, I understand your point, Jack, about how the Americans, and Adam Crichton wrote about it in the Australian today, and others have, that America doesn't want to get involved in a forever war in a faraway place. And I totally understand that. But we've gone beyond that point where the Trump administration has basically stripped all forms of cooperation to the Ukrainians.
Well, I've read as much as I could on the intelligence situation, and what it all boils down to. They've said they've limited it, and they've been unclear in exactly how it's been limited. No one's putting their hand up and explaining how that's going to work, and just what's been limited. That hasn't been explained, and I suspect no one will explain it. But yes, that's where it is, and that's where the American people are on this.
Yeah, well, the American people might be, we don't want boots on the ground and we don't want air support. But let me ask you, would or should the American Air Force act as refuelers for, let's say, French fighter jets? I mean, the cooperation comes in many forms.
Yep.
And this is what we don't understand about Trump's position at this stage. And a lot of people have been saying, well, he doesn't believe that Russia is a great threat to global peace. He believes that there are other countries, one in particular, that is. But really what this must be telling every country around the world with any sort of agreement in place or treaty in place with the United States, including Australia, that you cannot basically rely on the Trump administration to come to our aid and fulfil their treaty obligations.
Yeah. Somewhere all the polling is consistent on this, with a bit of a range. Somewhere between 65 and 80% of Americans want a ceasefire now.
Well, that's terrific. I mean, let's just say 65% of Americans couldn't find Ukraine on the map. I'd be surprised if it wasn't higher, to be honest. But there is no constituency for an ongoing war in the United States. Is what I'm saying. But so does that mean that the Trump administration will not offer any moral or tactical or strategic support? I mean, we're not talking about boots on the ground. We're talking about things like, will you refuel? Will you allow these the coalition of the willing in Europe access to US intelligence. These sorts of things.
None of
it's
that's
very
quite
unclear.
It is quite unclear. And this is a problem that Europe has caused to itself, because since the fall of the Berlin Wall, every United States president has told Europe to get off the couch and do something about this and develop some capacity of their own. And they have just sneered at the US presidents.
Well, I'm not sure that's the problem. What we've had, Jack, the problem is that overnight, really overnight, in the space of 2 weeks, the Trump administration has flipped the world order over. Now it's Russia, China, the United States, and everyone else can look after themselves. And so no warning, just we're going to do it this way. A sort of ad hoc way. So there are all these questions unanswered about what support the United States would provide a European coalition against Russia. It's not troops, it's not boots on the ground, it's not pilots in the air necessarily. It's all the intel goodies, all the satellites, all the military satellites that are orbiting around the planet, and what access they're going to provide them. Because if that's going to be withdrawn, Jack, and right now it is, if that's going to be withdrawn, then you'd have to say basically that the US has taken a pro-Russian position.
I'm not sure I describe it as that. I describe it as just withdrawing support from Ukraine. But this is a European.
They've actually, this week, the Trump administration has ordered its various cyber arms to stop what's called offensive cyber activity in Russia.
Yep, that we know has actually happened, yes. Yeah.
And have they required the Russians to do the same? Because the Russians are the masters of misinformation. They're the masters of cyber attacks. There's evidence that the Russians tried to shut down entire electrical grids in the United States. And no consequences for any of this, and no discussion about, look, we won't interfere with the normal function of your society. We won't attack them. We won't bring about cyber attacks from Russia. It's only the Americans are pulling out of this.
Yeah, well, people can get as cross as they like, but I think there's no constituency in the United States for them to do what you want them to do, and I don't think that's going to change.
Well, the question we're going to ask is, first the question I'd ask is, why should the Americans, if they're not going to engage, why should the Americans be part of any negotiated solution?
Because might is right in this instance. You can't leave them off the table because they can determine how it works.
I know, but if they've gone there with a static position, which is basically Ukraine's territory will be reduced by 1/8 due to Russian incursions.
20%, yeah.
20%. The Ukrainians do have Russian territory as well. So we haven't really got to the point of where we're going to talk about the borders, but Crimea is off the table. NATO membership is off the table. And basically the idea of the Russians going back to the February 2021 borders is also off the table.
Yes, I don't think even in Europe, I don't think there's a constituency to do anything about the borders.
Again, I understand the position. I mean, they don't want another Vietnam. They don't want another Afghanistan. I perfectly understand the position. But where it goes beyond that, where it starts getting into a failure to share intelligence, a failure to provide moral and logistical support, then really you have to ask yourself, are they little more than just a mouthpiece for Russia? I mean, Putin, we've hardly heard from Putin in the last couple of weeks. He must be sitting at home scratching himself wondering how this all happened in the space of 2 weeks.
He doesn't need to do a thing. What's got to happen from the other side is people have got to be realistic and say, what's actually possible?
Well, let's just move to the central issue. Should there be a ceasefire? And I don't think there should be. I mean, a ceasefire would only provide, well, both sides, but Russia in particular, to rearm, to retrain army, and develop new hardware assets. And so a ceasefire, I don't see any reason why the Ukrainians should entertain an idea of a ceasefire, certainly not on those terms.
So what do they do?
Well, they keep fighting. They have the support of Europe for now, or most of it, certainly the major powers in Europe, the French, the Germans, the Poles, the UK, and they will have some time to increase their military spending. The EU was throwing in, what was it, 80 billion euro, Jack?
800 billion.
800 billion it was, too.
They're talking about.
I thought about saying 800, I thought it can't be that much. Nearly $1 trillion.
That's their back of the envelope number, yeah.
It is. It must be said. And if you wanted to do an audit on the spend, you'd find a fair bit of it. It'd end up in Monaco in a casino. So persist with the Ukrainian support. I mean, basically, these questions, these unanswered questions about intel and cooperation and things like that, you cannot force someone to the negotiating table under these circumstances. I mean, they're basically asking Ukraine to surrender. I think the war should. I think there should be no ceasefire, certainly not under those terms. So your objectives remain essentially to protect as much territory much of Ukraine's territory as possible.
So an ongoing holding war.
Well, that's all the Russians have going for them. If you have a ceasefire, that will give them, and the Ukrainians too, to be sure, but the Ukrainians, the number of army or the number of soldiers they can put in the battlefield is very restricted now.
Yes.
And of course, the Russians have had to use North Korean troops, so they're not travelling well either. They've probably lost the best part of 1 million troops. 800,000 seems to be a pretty good number.
Yeah, I've seen numbers that are not 1 million, but not too far, closer to 1 million than 500,000.
Yeah, that's right. So 800,000 seems to be the figure, and a ceasefire would allow them to restock. I mean, Russia is, well, it has an economy not much larger than Australia's, but it has within the country the ability to rearm and retrain soldiers, or get soldiers in for training, conscript soldiers and move them in. Yeah. So
their GDP is smaller than Italy's. It's a disgrace for Europe that they don't have the capacity to do anything about this, despite having, 3 times the GDP and double the population, and they can't do a thing about it. And that's a disgrace. And it's a disgrace to the feckless and dishonourable Europeans.
Well, yes, you've got a bit of a problem with them. And I agree that they have been lazy and they've gone fat on Russian cheap energy and all this sort of stuff. But at the same time, I think the European, and they've probably got a bit lazy around NATO as well. Not so much. I'm not just talking about the spending, but this whole view that NATO will be there to protect Europe, come what may. And that's all over now. NATO's on life support, and I don't think in 3 months' time, I don't think it'll exist.
I don't agree with that. I think it still will exist, but Europe's on serious notice now. But it's not just the money they spend on NATO that's missing. Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the European Union and a former German defence minister, was asked in an interview the other day, did any of her children serve in the military? And she just laughed at the very idea of that. And that's a problem, because having military capacity isn't just money. It requires will and the ability to and the capacity to sacrifice, so people will actually go and do it. And Europe, continental Europe, apart from the French, is completely lacking in that.
I think the Brits have been very good. I mean, look, this has all happened in 2 weeks, Jack. This is the thing. So Europe,
it's all happened it's all happened in 30 years.
No, it's happened in 2 weeks. You know, the NATO. I mean, US as a part of NATO. I think that's more or less dead. And really, the shift in US foreign policy be significant. As I said to you last night, I could understand that if Trump was an isolationist, but he's not an isolationist. He's an interventionist. I don't understand it, but it does raise the question, Jack, and we've got to deal with it. Is Donald Trump a Russian asset, a Russian intelligence asset? And I am skeptical, but there is a report that's been going around for a while that last month a fellow by the name of Elna Musayev, who's a former Soviet and Kazakh security official, quite senior, he claimed in a Facebook post that US President Donald Trump was recruited in 1987 by the KGB, the intelligence agency of the Soviet Union, and assigned the name Krasnov. Look, there's been a little bit of corroboration around that from another former KGB member of a more junior rank. But Musayev was quite senior in the KGB. You know, I mean, look, he might have all sorts of different motives for saying these things, but it's out there. I noticed it was published with a fair amount of glee by the Mirror Group last weekend. But look, also, Jack, X, the social media platform, has a AI capacity known as Grok. And when someone asked Grok whether Donald Trump was a Russian plant or not, Grok said the estimation of likelihood was 75 to 85% that Trump is a Putin-compromised asset, leaning toward the higher end, that's around 85%, due to the depth and consistency of the pattern. The high end reflects the cumulative weight of decades-long financial ties, his unique refusal to criticise Putin despite ample opportunity, and policy choices aligning with Kremlin goals, unexplainable by mere coincidence or ideology alone. That's Elon Musk's AI, says that, Jack.
Yeah, I was amused last night when that came through and I realised it had come from Grok, and I thought, bloody hell. Southern Highlands Jack's become a Musk man. I did.
No, someone, in fact, I got that off Insta from a mob called Right Wing Watch. They've been very busy of late.
I think it's unlikely that Trump is a Russian asset for all sorts of reasons, but always, I'm 69. I'm never, I'm used to being surprised by things, and it is entirely possible. Can I just make one comment? In the midst of all of this stress and tension, I do like a bit of humour. And I saw this last night on Twitter from a German chap. And what he had to say was this: as a German, I just want to get this straight. The entire Western world wants us to build up a huge army, march through Poland, and fight the Russians if necessary. I'm just writing it down so there are no misunderstandings in the future.
Oh, look, I think if you told the Poles tomorrow, look, hit Moscow, they'd be jumping out of their skins. They'd be going there first. Yes, it is a very sort of strange situation, must be said. Now, Jack, you had a very colourful phrase about a New South Wales Labor politician. You said of him, Joe Tripodi, by the way, that if he wasn't a crook, he's doing a pretty good impersonation of one. And while the SMH Foreign Editor, Peter Hartcher, has come right out and said it, Trump is a Russian asset. Trump is a Putin asset.
Oh, Peter Hartcher said this, is he?
Yeah, during the week.
He's never walked past a conspiracy theory without stopping to give it a pat, Peter.
Well, look, I am with you on that line. Trump may not Trump may not be a Russian asset, but he's doing bloody good impersonation of one. All right.
I hope Joe doesn't sue me for that.
It'd be an interesting defo. I'd go armed with a couple of lever arch files, mate, that you might not have seen.
I think the exact quote was, after having met him at a luncheon, one of those sort of promotional luncheon things, I said that he might not be a crook, but he could fill in for one until the crook turned up.
Well, you are entitled to call him corrupt, Jack, because he has been labelled corrupt by the ICAC. So you can get away with that one. Fentanyl, it's just one of those topics that I want to very briefly discuss, Jack. It is at least expressed as the basis for some of the tariff issues that we're going to talk about soon. It's a really interesting point. A friend of mine was telling me he'd been to see a speech in London of a senior executive of a company, a woman who they have developed AI technology to detect fentanyl.
Yep.
Complex mathematical equation. I'm not entirely sure how it works, but it does.
Well, once you got to the point with complex mathematical, I've got no idea how it's going to work.
Yeah. I'm not entirely sure, but it's 99.999999 sort of 0.999988% effective in terms of seizures at the border. It's a really interesting point. Do you think it's Australians are on the coke, and to a lesser degree the methamphetamine? Coke is everywhere in the UK. And it's the drug of choice for so many there. But in the United States, fentanyl, Jack. Does that say something about the national national identity of these countries?
It just means we're more discerning.
Yeah, and perhaps more entertaining. If you ever sat around a heroin addict, they don't do cabaret.
No, they don't. Saturday Night Live, by the way, this is a side issue, right back in form. They had a very, very good little skit the other week. Is it Shane Gillis? Is that his name?
Yes. You're talking about the couple of beers?
A couple of beers and a little bum.
A couple of beers and a little bump. He's a very funny guy. He does a fantastic Donald Trump impersonation.
He does too. He's excellent.
He's the best at it. Yeah,
he's got the hands going, the whole thing. He's very good. I recommend to our listeners that they get on the internet and find Shane Gillis doing a couple of beers and a little bump.
That's very good. Look, we'll probably have a bit more of a protracted discussion about fentanyl. It is coming from, I'm told, essentially from China, from Guangzhou. It's going to the cartels in Mexico. So 99% of the seizures, border seizures, come from Mexico. Canada
come through Mexico,
through Mexico. Canada is less than, I think it's 0.2%, and the rest of it is other places. It's really difficult in these days of organised crime, Jack, because you'll see, let's say, shipping containers. They'll be pinged all around the world. But what we do know is that as much as I say, this company is using AI to detect fentanyl smugglers, Jack, the cartels are using AI to make better and cheaper fentanyl. Well, more powerful fentanyl.
Am I right in saying some of it's part manufactured in Mexico as well?
It's all synthesized in Mexico, and the precursor drugs, for the most part, are relatively benign. The most active constituent in fentanyl is a drug that's commonly used in cosmetics. So it's not that easy to detect. We know too that Chinese organised crime groups have used encrypted messaging services to basically provide the cartels with the recipe for making fentanyl. They'll sell them. They'll ship some of the precursors, but some of the others are readily available through industrial chemists.
Well, I wouldn't know much about that, not being very much of a cosmetic user. And now that I can see you on the screen, I don't think you are either.
No, I wouldn't be. I wouldn't be buying. I forget what the chemical's called. It sounds a little bit similar to fentanyl, but yes, it has benign uses besides the manufacture of fentanyl, and it seems that. A lot of it is being made in the cartels. A lot of it will be getting shipped to America, and those are the seizures you won't see because, well, they just don't pick them up. You've just got so much container traffic going into a place like the United States. We'll get back to the UK, but we'll just keep going with the United States. The S&P is S&P 500 down. The equities markets are down 5% since early January, wiping all gains from the bullish December period, and then some, Jack.
2.2% this year to date.
Down. Overall.
Yes.
Yeah. So the market, as I say, was bullish in December, but it's gone south since. And we should have known this, Jack, because the CEO of Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett, the Oracle of Omaha, was selling in December.
Yes.
He sold $5 billion worth of stock in the Bank of America and $3 billion worth of stock of Citigroup shares, a number of other smaller companies he's divested himself from. He is cashed up and ready to go. Obviously, the view is we're not talking about a market collapse, but his view is that the market will continue to decline and he will be able to come in with his more than $10 billion in cash. Berkshire Hathaway has investment. It has, I think, more than $200 billion under investment, but he'll have $10 billion in cash to invest in some of these companies that may have dropped off in value. He said, the Oracle of Omaha, he's 94 years of age. He's still pretty sharp, mate. You wouldn't mind sitting down and just talking to him for 5 minutes and following that investment advice if you had a few, Bob, because he's rarely wrong. But he said of tariffs, Jack, tariffs are or were an act of war to some degree. He meant that in an historical sense, that tariffs could be an expression of hostilities between two countries. But he went on to say, over time, they become a tax on goods. Tariffs become a tax on goods. I mean, the tooth fairy doesn't pay them. When the man's right, and he's right very often.
This is economics 101, I might add. I can't think who it was the other day who said...
Well, it's investment 101, really. Yeah, it's not so much economics.
No, but it's economics 101 as well. There was one of the Australian commentators said just this week that if the US were to impose tariffs on us, we should not retaliate. And I think that's right.
Well, the mooch, Anthony Scaramucci, has weighed in on the tariff issue, Jack, and because... The Trump administration has said they're bringing in tariffs. The Mexicans and the Canadians, the Mexicans now been suspended. They will have further talks on what's going to happen there. The Canadian
and the auto
vehicle manufacturers, they've been given a month to get their act together. And this is what Anthony Scaramucci, the mooch, had to say about it. It's like having the Keystone Cops run a superpower. The business community has descended upon the White House and explained to them how crazy it is to introduce these tariffs so back and forth, with no real policy initiative or idea as to help lower and middle income people. Focus on the price of eggs, Jack.
Yeah.
They've got problems there too. But anyway... shall we? We won't. We'll get back to eggs because we have to deal with a couple of things, Jack. The SCOTUS rolled. The Supreme Court of the United States rolled the Trump administration during the week with two of their conservative justices uh, providing opinions that were or providing judgments that were contrary to the presidential applications.
Yes, they're both in both cases they are preliminary judgments, so we don't know what the final situation is going to be. But they've declined to intervene to stop federal court judges from having wider injunctions. So they essentially what the SCOTUS did was to say, no, we're not going to intervene. So it's a one paragraph judgment. But it is a reminder that people always wrap it on and think that because a certain president has appointed a justice to the Supreme Court, that they kind of own that justice. And that's never been the case. It's always been bollocks.
Well, Trump thinks so, mate. Did you see some of the body language when he was meeting the Supreme Court justices? Well, it would have been about Wednesday our time.
Yeah.
It was not a lot of love there. Not from the two most recent appointments, anyway.
And these are lifetime appointments. Once people are appointed,
that's nuts in itself, isn't it?
Yeah.
That they're lifetime appointments is crazy.
Yeah. No. Although there's one of our former High Court judges is still unhappy that wasn't allowed to continue. He mumbles about when I reached the age of statutory senility and was made to go off the court.
It's not statutory senility, but one could argue that there are quite a lot of septuagenarians who are a bit got a few roos bouncing around the top paddock jack loose.
Yeah, well, there was a judge in Australia who he had to read a lot of High Court cases, and I certainly have, who went on and on and on as a judge for a long time. Edward McTiernan, and the average McTiernan judgment used to say, "I concur."
Well, there you go. You can do that you can do that well into your 80s, but. Yeah. Anyway, it's a reminder that there are checks and balances against presidential power.
Yes,
the Congress is moot. The states starting to get a little bit fired up.
Well, Congress could exercise a hell of a lot more power. It's just chosen not to for the last 30 years. Yeah,
they're all the Democrats have struck dumb. We'll get to the presidential speech in a minute. The Democrats have been struck dumb more or less, with one or two exceptions, and there they were holding up signs during the presidential address to a joint sitting in the Congress, and I just thought it just looked really churlish and limp, you know.
If you thought that was bad, have you seen the video that they've put out? Probably half a dozen of them, where they dance around. Shadow boxing, and it says "choose a fighter," and this is Democratic Congress people doing this. They are absolutely clueless.
I think the best strategy for them, look, they are rudderless. That's the first thing. So they don't have any leaders.
No.
Well, they've got a few of the old school there, but they need to see some more senior, and they need to see some of their younger participants move into senior ranks. Look, I think that will happen over time, but you could make a very sound argument that they should say and do very little for the next year or so, and hope like hell that the economy goes south. It's certainly not looking flash since Trump has taken over. And that people will be angry enough to vote those majorities away in both houses.
Well, whenever you leave a vacuum like that, someone will fill it, and the man with the wonderful hair from San Francisco has stepped right in to fill this. Gavin Newsom has started his podcast. And it's been a tectonic shift in the very first episode. You know, the other day, some weeks ago, Trump had issued an executive order restricting the participation of trans athletes in women's and girls' sports. The Congress followed that up. The Republican Congress put up a bill in the same terms, and all bar 2 Democrats voted against it. It went to the Senate, and every single Democrat voted against it, which means it didn't proceed to a vote. They didn't have enough to force the vote. This is the kindest to Democrats polling makes it a 70-30 issue. That is, 70% agree with what the Republicans were trying to do, and yet they all voted against it. Gavin Newsom's come out in his very first podcast, interviews Charlie Kirk, who's a Republican, and agrees with Charlie Kirk.
Extreme
This
right.
is
Extreme right.
Yeah. That the Democrats should be on the other side. So he's already marking out territory where he's completely different to the Democrat leadership, and that's very good politics from Gavin Newsom's point of view, because it sets him apart. It makes him the leader. He's the first mover to get the Democrats back into the centre.
Did you see the interview with, I presume, one of the overseers of college sport, Jack? And he was asked, how many women athletes are there in college sports at the moment? And he replied that there were over 300,000. I think it was 300,000. He gave a specific number, 300,000. He said, how many of them are trans? And he said 10. 10.
I don't think the numbers matter. This is a losing issue for the Democrats.
The numbers do matter, Jack. They actually do matter, because what we see when we strip it all back is, if you've got a potential problem, if you've got this heart-breaking problem that you have to deal with, when you're dealing with a percentage of participants in sport that's a less than 1%, well, not just less than 1%, less than 0.1% of all participating women athletes, and I don't think you got much of a problem. What you have is a culture war issue that's now become front and centre for the American people.
Yeah, if you find yourself on the 30% argument, and they are on a number of issues, the Democrats, that's a losing method.
People should need to explain those statistics. 10 out of 306,000.
People have been explaining that all the way along, and they're still losing.
No. This was just disclosed in the last month.
Yeah, people have been quoting similar numbers, if not exact the same number, similar numbers for some time, and they're still losing. What I'm saying is, I think Gavin Newsom's on the right track. He will be so far in front of the pack because he's actually addressing the issues where the Democrats are losing.
I understand what you're saying. What I'm saying to you, if you tracked, let's say, the support in America for same-sex marriage, Jack, and if you went back to the 70s, what sort of figures do you think would be in support of same-sex marriage?
Or you can do even better than that. You can go with interracial marriages and go back to the 1960s.
Yeah, well, you know what I'm saying.
It's gone from 5% to 95% in favour. Yes,
sure. And so attitudes change over time, and they change because of information, not misinformation, hopefully, but because of information like the nature of the problem that everyone is agonising over in the United States is 10 athletes out of 306,000.
And but the trend in this case is going the other way.
All right. Well, no one knows if they were born out of eggs, but the Trump speech did feature a reference to research into transgender mice, Jack. Hard to believe, but there it was. There are reasons why scientists use this. They don't do it for fits and giggles. They do it because they are in the business of performing things like cancer research. But anyway, this is where we've got this sort of level of disinformation. It's disinformation coming from Trump. He lied his way through the speech. We shouldn't be bothered to. We shouldn't be. We shouldn't be surprised by any of that. Trump's Secretary of Agriculture, Brooke Rowland, says the solution to high egg prices for Americans is to get some chickens and raise them in your own backyard.
Yes, I thought that was you remember the learn to code memes that used to go around?
Yeah, this is worse than that. Oh, well, I mean, Americans in cities are living in fairly close quarters, so that's one thing that's going to be a problem there. The other problem is the real reason, and you would think Secretary of Agriculture Brooke Rowlands would be across this. The real reason why eggs are expensive in the United States, to a lesser degree here, is because of outbreaks of H5N1. Now, we've had H5N1 in chickens. We've had it in cattle now in the United States. No one seems to be monitoring this very well, certainly not Brooke Rowlands, who wants to live in some sort of fantasy where everyone has a chook shed in their backyard.
She was top, by the way. I don't know whether you saw the release of the Epstein files. And what's her name? I still call her Pam Bondi, but it's Bondi. I think they call it. They pronounce it that.
Yeah.
They had their white lever arch files out the front of the thing, and they were dancing as they were explaining to the press what was in these files. Now, I got to tell you, this is just nuts. That they look like a whole lot of nurses during COVID. You know,
it got even worse than that, Jack, because Bondi said they had a deadline. The end of the month to release the Epstein files. In fact, they made an announcement that they were going to release it on the 29th of February. That was the official announcement. No one with a working calendar in the office or leap years. Anyway, so they went through this theatrical farce, and then they released what had been released in 2015, and some of the stuff that had been released in 2015. They had basically blackened out. You know, some of the stuff that were released 9 years ago could no longer be seen. We know, because we've seen the manifests, you would have seen them too, Jack, but they put Trump on the burner 3 times, on Epstein's burner 3 times.
Yeah,
So
Trump, Bill Gates, Bill Clinton, you know, they're all on there. We've all seen them.
Trump had 3 trips. I think Clinton has acknowledged and the manifest support is 2 trips to Africa. So what we're looking for is and we haven't seen yet. And one
to Hong Kong, I was amused to say.
I mean, Laura Loomer's gone off a trolley. She's one of the extreme right people who wasn't picked up in the Trump administration, seems very bitter about it all, but she's very, very crazy about this. And she was saying that the American people demand more on X, and I just jumped in and said, they're just trying to scrub Donald Trump's names off the passenger manifest. It takes time, you know.
So what is it about the dancing in the United States? I mean, the Democrats are doing it, the Republicans are doing it. It just looks. No one looks like a serious person if you're dancing around in front of a camera, you know.
Well, in other news, Jack, other related news, we should have done this while we're on the chooks, but there's been an outbreak of measles, and it's really expanded to the point now where we've got an infectious case in New York City. Now, I don't know whether that's someone who's flown into the country or whether it's part of that spread from West Texas, but certainly that spread in West Texas has now gone into New Mexico. One of those people infected has gone to San Antonio, a city of 1.5 million people. So it's all a bit of a disaster. And we know that this outbreak occurred in a Mennonite community where vaccination rates were, well, in Byron Bay terms, not too bad, about 82%. But that's where the weaknesses come into the system. Anyway, Bobby Kennedy issued a Bobby Kennedy Jr. Issued a statement this week that was published on Fox News. What would we say? It was. He basically said the best form of protection against measles infection is a vaccine, is the MMR vaccine. And
Bobby Kennedy said that.
Bobby Kennedy Jr. said that.
Yeah, I did see that, yeah.
And in lockstep, every anti-vax nut job in the country walked away from him. They said, the mask has come off, he's a member of the deep state, all this kind of stuff.
Do you get the impression that
You cannot win with these
Bobby Kennedy is not so much a man with strong personal convictions as a man who wants a job?
Yeah, he wants relevance, Jack. Look, much of this measles outbreak is down to him and his advocacy with the Children's Defence League. But what really amused me was that the anti-vax group, who have hailed this guy as their hero, now have shit-canned him. And it just tells you that these cookers, these anti-vax cookers, they are just the most unreliable people on God's earth. We just want to go back to the UK, Jack. Starmer, Keir Starmer, has emerged essentially as a statesman.
I wouldn't quite call him a statesman yet. He had a very, very bad start to his prime ministership, but over the last 2 weeks, all of a sudden, he actually looked big enough for the job.
Yeah.
And he hadn't looked anywhere near big enough for the job until
look, it was frustrating because the first couple of months, they just look unprepared for power. And it was...
They still look like that to a large extent. But
it's
not
as
himself
if it should have come as a shock to them to find themselves on the Treasury benches.
No, they're always going to win the election. They should have been prepared.
If we've been elected, we're going to have to do stuff. I mean, they had. Yeah, but look,
they were 5 lengths in front of the clock tower. They should have known they were going to win. I might add, it's just him. I don't think there's a single minister. Oh, Wes Streeting in health's not doing too bad. They got one minister who looks halfway competent, and the rest of them look terrible. But
could be worse, Jack. I had a bit of a battle with one of the Corbynites during the week on X. One of the things about the Corbynites, and we've discussed this on earlier programs, is they are pro-Russian. I mean, they talk about peace, but really they want Ukraine to roll over.
Yes.
And put the white flag up. So I had a bit of a battle with one of their clowns. I can't remember his name. He's
not only are they pro-Russia, they're pro-Russia and pro-Hamas.
Well, I should have said, thank you, not just pro-Hamas, Jack, but viciously anti-Semitic as well.
I mean, that's a great running double, isn't it? Pro-Russian and pro-Hamas.
But some of his buddies did. Let me have a quick look to see if I can find this clown. Yeah, there we go. Here he is. Craig Murray, Jack, heard of him?
No.
Former Labor member. I think he was an ambassador to, a country. Can't think of which one. Historian, journalist, dissident, human rights activist, which in his case means anti-Semite. But yeah, he'd come up with this. Zelensky had banned political parties. Well, yeah, he banned political parties, some political parties, because they were pro-Russian. They were being funded by Russia. Anyway, so little battles we have along the way, Jack.
Yeah, I think I got a bit of a kicking back for making some comment when Jeremy Corbyn was saying something. I said, well, at least we now know whose side to be on, and it won't be Russia or Hamas if Jeremy's backing them.
Yeah, well, he's very handy to have around, Jeremy. I mean, if you do the exact opposite of what he says, you will be in good shape. All right. We did discuss, we've been talking a fair bit about behaviour on campus, Jack.
Yes.
And These issues have caused great consternation and great criticism of academia. And well, of course, if we want to dwell on Trump, and I probably shouldn't, but Trump has said in his speeches, if you're an overseas student and you protest, you will be deported. If you're not an overseas student, you will be expelled. And there are equal views, or views as equally strident as those in Australia. Jack, what's the answer?
I think it's about the behaviour, not about what's being said. I think we're the whole discussion as to what constitutes anti-Semitism and what constitutes Islamophobia has become theological. It's like a couple of bishops arguing about how many angels you can fit on the head of a pin. It's time we sort of moved on from what people are saying as to how they behave. Do they let students go to classes? Can students organise, have meetings of their own, invite guest speakers, go to classes, sit in the library without being attacked or prevented from doing that? If you solve that problem, most of the problem will go away.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. People are entitled to protest, not just at universities, and they're entitled to say pretty much whatever they feel like, as long as they're not inciting violence.
We've talked about this before. We're both living proof that people are well entitled to have ridiculous ideas when they're at university.
Indeed, yes.
And you can't do anything about that, nor should you do anything about that. But what you've got to do is to say, look, there are base levels of behaviour. You can protest, but what you can't do is prevent. I mean, they prevented Malcolm Turnbull from speaking at Sydney University. There's a whole lot of reasons why you wouldn't want to listen to Malcolm Turnbull, but you shouldn't stop anybody else from wanting to listen to
cruel, Jack. He's a very good friend of mine. Look, I agree with you. That certainly if you're impeding or obstructing another student from having access to an education, being allowed access to a lecture theatre, being allowed access to a tutorial, or even just enjoying their free time around the campus, they should be allowed to do that unfettered by people to a very large degree. If you've got a large group protesting, people have to skirt around them and all that sort of stuff. They should not be obstructed or hindered by those people. It should be safe enough that they feel free to turn up to university in a hijab, or turn up to university in a kippah, or wearing a Star of David, or whatever it is. It shouldn't be. That shouldn't be a handicap to their study. I think if people are facing persecution on that basis, on the clothes that they wear, the people who are seeking to persecute them, I've got no problem with them being expelled from university.
No, nor have I.
With a due process.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, we got sport, Jack. There's a lot of sport going on. Not as much, thank you to Cyclone Alfred.
Well, I'm blaming Donald Trump for that.
It's climate change, Jack. It's climate change.
No.
See how Brisbane is in a subtropical area, and yet it's having a tropical cyclone. These things were actually predicted, right? These things were actually predicted. It's one of those things.
Well, the genius in the White House, he knows how to fix cyclones and hurricanes and typhoons, and he just wouldn't nuke it for us, I mean,
I came across a few people. I don't know. My Instagram feed is just full of nutters, and so there are a group of people around, not just in Queensland. You would have heard about the chemtrail conspiracies.
Yeah.
So it leads on from chemtrail that there's no climate change. There is climate engineering. And we had people living in Brisbane who were saying, oh, this is all part of a contrived event for the deep state. Look at it. They're steering it directly towards Brisbane. And can you steer a cyclone? Has it got power steering? Can you move it easily, or is it going to be a bit difficult?
You've got to puff at it.
Funny, but also grossly offensive to those people who are really under the pump today and tomorrow and the rest of the week.
Yeah. You can still laugh.
Look, the climate engineering clowns. I don't know what you do with people like that, but I'm not paying for their deprogramming. All right, on to sport. We haven't had as much of it as we would like, but we do have the AFL kicking off tonight at the SCG with Sydney playing Hawthorn. Hawthorn looked to be in deep rebuild mode last year and were a work in progress, and then just emerged in the latter part of the season and ended up playing the finals. Got a very good young list. And they're up against the Swans, who, of course, had a very disappointing grand final last week. I know you'll be going for the Swannies, Jack. I think it'll be a nice hit out for Hawthorn just to see where they are too against a very good side.
Yeah, well, the Swannies played the best football of the year in the first half of the season last year, and the Hawks probably played the best football in the second half.
Yeah, probably Brisbane, but they were fantastic. There's no doubt about it. They've got a great young list. You do hear this thing, second year blues, and where a player who's had a great debut year or perhaps even a second or third season where they've kind of emerged and they might struggle a little bit because the opposition coaches will find them out, see where they might have a few weaknesses and things like that. We'll see if that's the case with Hawthorn today. Everyone expects them to go well. A lot of good judges are saying the Swans will win the premiership this year with the change of coach. Dean Cox, a former Eagles ruckman and assistant coach at Sydney for many, many years, is now the coach. It'd be interesting to see what sort of season they summon. I think Sydney got a few out, haven't they? Errol Goulden is missing, but I think if the ruckman misses, it'll be hard for them to get enough footy, I would think.
Yeah. My man inside the building tells me that they're all very happy with Dean Cox and it's all looking pretty good.
All right. Collingwood play the Giants on Saturday. And that'll be an interesting one. I think the Giants have just got a few too many on the injury list to pose too many problems for Collingwood. But we shall see. Carlton play the Tigers next Thursday. So we hope the Blues go. I hope the Blues go well. ICC Champions Trophy.
Well, if they can't beat the Tigers, they're in big trouble.
Well, the Tigers got a very young list. I mean, they recruited 11 players who are draftees, so they're 18-year-olds. And their number one draft pick, unfortunately, has got a broken jaw in the pre-season, get one of the pre-season games, and he'll miss quite a few weeks. What you'll find with those things is they just don't have that fitness to go that last quarter. That's what you tend to find with young guys. They just don't have the tank.
Yeah, it will be like watching the Giants in the first couple of years.
Yeah, there are some people saying that Richmond won't win a game. We'll see. It's going to be. If I was a Richmond supporter, I'd be really excited about just watching these young guys go around because you know they're going to improve. The ICC Champions Trophy, Jack, the final will be played at India's home ground in Dubai, and they will play the Black Caps, who are very, very good against South Africa. Australia didn't make enough runs. I mean, I think that's a fairly obvious statement. Probably didn't make them quick enough. Travis Head looked excellent just for a little while. Thought he was going to explode. Didn't happen. And they struggled to put partnerships together. But considering their bowling attack was second string's a bit rough, but it's not their best bowling attack. There's no doubt about that. I thought they had a pretty good tournament. Yeah,
a lot of praise for Smith's captaincy, I've got to say, from the English commentators.
Announced his, of course, Steve Smith has announced his retirement from one-day internationals. He's still competing at Test level and still competing at in T20 level, which he's actually not in the Australian squad as it stands in T20, or he's certainly not in their best 11. But he's having a crack, and good on him. I watched some highlights of him that went for about 5 minutes, just of Steve Smith catches. The best catch I've seen is Mark Waugh, and I reckon Steve Smith giving him a nudge. I think he's as good as Mark Waugh at just making incredible catches. Wonderful player.
Yeah, I don't think doesn't make it look quite as effortless as Mark Waugh did. But,
Smith's throwing himself on the ground and hurling his body about. He is a wonderful field. I think certainly he's the record holder for catches for Australia in tests. Wonderful career, and we hope that his test career runs along as well. While we're talking about great players, Jack, Kane Williamson got a ton in the semi-final against South Africa, as did Ravi Rajendra, who's a wonderful new talent or emerging talent for the Kiwis. Where you look at him and go, gee, this guy's going to make a lot of test runs, going to make a lot of runs in international competition. But Kane Williamson, you name some of the great New Zealand bats, let's start with Glenn Turner, Martin Crowe, Stephen Fleming. I guess you'd throw Brendan McCullum in there. Ross Taylor, of course, I think is the second highest run scorer in tests for New Zealand. But Kane Williamson is head and shoulders the best bat that New Zealand has presented to the world.
Yes,
he's just a run machine.
Yep.
That's been an interesting thing to go out and bat, put the pads on and go out and bat, knowing in the back of your mind that you're the best batsman your country has produced. Wouldn't have been a player for Australia who'd been able to do that since Bradman. All right, NRL, Zach, we did say we'd do. Oh no, there's just one issue about the AFL season, and this year coverage will change significantly, particularly around the free-to-air stuff. And this is all part of the media ownership stuff that it was all part of that contractual arrangement that Fox Sports or AFL Footy, whatever they call themselves, for Fox Sports, they will have their own commentary teams this year. They'll do their own coverage. And Saturday afternoon games for Vic, Tasmania and the NT will no longer be made available free to air, Jack. That's I think that'll make a lot of people pretty cross, I would have thought.
Can I quote Paul Roos?
Yeah, go for it.
That is as crazy as I've heard coming out of the AFL for many, many years. How can you not service the football public that has paid so much money, particularly at the moment when things are tough? This is a disgraceful decision from the AFL.
Well, it was cast about 3 years ago, Jack. So we've had plenty of warning on this. I'm lucky enough to have a Foxtel coverage, and it won't affect me too much. And I try and avoid free-to-air coverage these days because it's just you've got these interminable ads. But for other people, I can certainly understand this. I did look at the ratings, Jack, for Saturday afternoon games, and let's say, and when we look at Sydney ratings and things like that, let's say the Sydney Swans weren't playing or the Giants weren't playing, and if it was a game like, let's say, Carlton v Richmond, virtually zero viewers around the country other than Victoria, NT and Tasmania. So tough on them. But anyway, now we did say we'd do a bit of a preview of the NRL. Jack, you had a bit of homework. What do you reckon?
Do you want mine?
Yeah.
Well, the first couple are easy. Panthers, the Roosters.
Roosters got an absolute belting last night, Jack. Get the hands
they
of the
did,
Broncos.
but I still think they'll be there.
They did start poorly last year too.
Yeah. But who else? I've got a couple of surprises. I think the Titans and the Storm will be there. I think the Titans, the Bulldogs and the Dolphins can make it.
Well, because they had their Vegas hit out, Jack. What do we make of it? Is it a success story, the Vegas stuff? I looked across the crowd. I watched both games and I looked across the crowd. I think it's a sort of 80,000 seat stadium, and it would looked about half full. And I'm going to say that half of those will be comped.
Yeah, that's probably right. I think it's been a success, and I think it can keep working. They did have a Wigan St Helens game, I think, as well, didn't they? Which and that dragged in. There were 10,000 English fans there.
Look, I actually didn't know that. I mean,
Yeah.
I watched the Raiders Warriors and the Panther Sharks game, but I
Yeah,
didn't know that they had the UK Super League sides over there.
But the way this is going to work, the base of your crowd it'll be for the same reason that Sevens rugby works around Asia, is that you have a country the size of the US and Canada, with a lot of expats who work over there, and they will go along. This will become an annual meetup for people in fin services and all that sort of stuff. They'll say, let's, we like a bit of NRL, let's go down to Vegas and watch it, They'll probably tell their wives, look, I'd prefer if the games were in Boston, but it's in Vegas, so we'll go there. And it'll be a boys' weekend away. So that gives you a base level of a crowd. If you've got a base level of a crowd, you've got something to build on,
Well, they did invite Donald Trump, Jack. Not sure if Donald sent the thanks but no thanks, but they also invited Dana White, the CEO of the Ultimate Fighting Championship, the UFC. And
he was there.
No, I believe he wasn't.
Oh, I thought I saw a photo of him there.
No, I don't think he was there, and so Volandis had to deal with the fact that he wasn't there. But the invitation was extended. I could be wrong, Jack. You may well be right. But my point about this is that the White Ribbon Group lambasted Peter Volandis about all of this, and I mean, talk about people in glass houses. The white ribbon mob was led by Andrew O'Keefe, Beefy O'Keefe, and every time
the TV chap,
yeah, he's had a few
so
problems
what
with
is the
domestic
white
violence along the way.
What is
he
the
was
white
one
ribbon?
of their ambassadors.
What's the white ribbon stand for?
Oh, it's God, all the pollies were wearing I'm going to say about 10 years ago, were wearing this. It's designed to raise awareness about domestic violence. The problem is that they appoint these sort of male figures, and very often, like Andrew O'Keefe, these male ambassadors who are standing around saying the right things aren't doing the right things. And then White Ribbon will either quietly remove them or just pretend it didn't happen. So that's that. But look, if you want my tips for the NRL, and you shouldn't pay too much attention to them, listeners, the Panthers will win this. They'll make it 5 in a row, I think. They looked cherry ripe last week. They had a good solid win over the Sharks, but they were missing 5 players, missing 5 run-on players. So they will be very, very good. Storm will be thereabouts. If you're looking for a bolter, I hope the Dragons do something this year. Otherwise, you'd have to wonder what's going on at that club. And the Bulldogs, we'll see how well they continue how well their revival continues. Had a good season last year. All right, well, that just about takes us out, Jack, unless you've got something up your sleeve. I think you let it rip early on. So that's it for the show today. We want to thank our listeners who've contributed a little bit. The mooch quote came from one of our favourite listeners. We thank them for that. And drop us a line. You know how to do it. I don't know how to say this all the time, listeners, but drop us a line. And if you've got any queries, comments, or criticisms. And that takes us out, Jack. Settle down. It'll be a wet night at the SCG. So low scoring, I'm saying. And we'll see how your Swannies get on there tonight. And again, my very best wishes for everyone in this Storm's path over the next few days. Please stay safe. Look after yourselves and look after one another. We'll talk to you later. See ya.